I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 78 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today we meet to resume our study of Canada's clean energy plans in the context of North American energy transformation. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. You'll notice me using these two cards. Yellow is a 30-second warning. Red is time's up. It's like a stop sign. So be conscious of that, but I will try not to interrupt you in mid-sentence so you can finish off your last thought. I will now like to welcome the witnesses who are with us this afternoon. From the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Matthew Holmes, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Relations, and joining him, Brian Dechu, Senior Director, Natural Resources, Environment and Sustainability. From the Canadian Climate Institute, Jonathan Arnold, Research Director, Clean Growth, by video conference. From the Canadian Labour Congress, President B. Brusque, thank you. And Alex Callahan, National Director, Health, Safety and Environment, by video conference. From the Macdonald Laurier Institute, Dr. Heather Exner-Pirot, Senior Fellow and Director, Energy, Natural Resources and Environment Program, also by video conference. From the Net Zero Advisory Body, Dan Wicklum, Co-Chair, by video conference. And from Unifor Quebec, Daniel Cloutier, Quebec Director, by video conference. Thank you for taking the time today to appear. We will begin with the Canadian Chamber of Commons. You have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome to the committee. Mr. Holmes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honourable members, it's a pleasure to join you today for this discussion. My colleague and I are here on behalf of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to speak to the steps necessary for Canada to meet the challenges and opportunities presented by the broader North American energy transformation. Getting the clean energy transition right is important to our members, not only do we represent the sectors and businesses most involved in this transformation, but also the communities across this country which they support. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce represents 200,000 Canadian businesses through more than 400 local, provincial, territorial chambers of commerce and boards of trade, and over 120 trade associations. We represent members of all sizes of business in every sector of the economy across all regions of the country. First, let me emphasize that the Canadian Chamber and our members recognize the paramount importance of addressing climate change and meeting our net zero goals. Canadian businesses of all sizes from coast to coast to coast are committed to playing their part in the collective effort to combat climate change. With that said, our remarks will focus on what Canadian businesses need from the federal government to help Canada achieve its economic and environmental ambitions and position our nation as a leader in the global transition economy. Candidly, what businesses need can be summarized in 4 words: ambition, clarity, predictability, and efficacy. I will now share the time with my colleague Brian Dechu.
Le Canada.
Canada does not lack ambition. We recognize and applaud the government's strong commitment to leading global initiatives to combat climate change. However, Canada can have all the ambition in the world, but only action gets things done. Unfortunately, Canada has earned a reputation as a country where big projects cannot be accomplished. We need to learn that working with the private sector is the only way to achieve our shared net zero emissions goals. The global shift to net zero consumption is well underway. Canada's ability to compete and succeed requires adaptability, speed, and effective coordination from both government and industry. Canadian companies will struggle to keep up with the pace of this transition if they don't have the necessary infrastructure, regulatory frameworks, and funding programs in place in time.
Canada's lack of clarity, predictability, and efficacy in its approach to environmental policies represents the foremost challenge in achieving the nation's net zero commitments. These issues impede the ability of businesses to make informed decisions, plan for the long term, and allocate resources effectively. They also discourage the foreign direct investment and innovation our economy needs. The urgency of 2030 and 2050 net zero target requires that the federal government prioritize removing barriers that compromise competitiveness, delay projects approvals, and place redundant and overly onerous reporting requirements on businesses. Reducing permitting timelines to speed up the pace of investment and development of major projects. Accelerating the implementation of incentives for clean technology deployment and adaptation in Canada through investment tax credits, strategic finance, and targeted programming. Incentivize partnerships with Indigenous communities that advance decarbonization projects and supports economic reconciliation. Establishing a modernized, efficient regulatory framework that responds to the needs of industry and respects the jurisdictions of both the federal government and the provinces. Acknowledging regional differences as geographic, economic, and demographic diversity necessitates different policies, practices, and investments. Lastly, I understand the committee continues to examine the competitive challenges the United States Inflation Reduction Act poses for Canada in attracting investment for a domestic net zero economy. While Canada cannot directly rival the U.S. in terms of financial resources, nonetheless, direct financial support, investment, and incentives remain an indispensable part of the policy mix. What Canada must also strive for is to turn its regulatory framework and operational efficiency into a competitive strength that will allow us to spearhead the North American energy transformation. En procédant à ces
By making these adjustments, the Canadian government can restore the confidence Canadian businesses need to make long-term investment decisions, introduce innovative net zero technologies, and attract much-needed investment to our country, accelerating our progress towards our net zero ambitions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your opening statement. We will now go to the Canadian Climate Institute, Mr. Jonathan Arnold, who's by video conference.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to meet with this committee today. My remarks focus on 4 policy insights from the Canadian Climate Institute's research. They focus on policy solutions that can keep Canada's economy competitive and resilient as the world shifts to a net zero future. The first insight is that the global shift to a low carbon economy is accelerating and will fundamentally reshape Canada's competitiveness. Over 70 countries have now committed to net zero by mid-century. That covers over 90% of global GDP, 80% of global oil demand, and 75% of global natural gas demand. In financial markets, international investors managing over $61 trillion in assets have committed to net zero. At the same time, demand for keystone technologies such as solar panels, heat pumps, wind turbines, and batteries is growing rapidly as their prices continue to fall. These trends have flipped the script for Canada's long-term competitiveness. Moving too slowly is now a greater competitive risk than moving too quickly. The second insight is that Canada can compete in this global low-carbon economy without replicating the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. The IRA is perhaps the most concrete example of how the global transition is accelerating, directly affecting international investment choices and competitiveness. But its scale and magnitude make it impractical for Canada to emulate. Canada's advantage is a portfolio of policy tools, including targeted investment tax credits, as well as regulatory and pricing policies. In particular, carbon pricing improves the economics of low-carbon projects and is a powerful draw for investment. Carbon pricing is also cost-effective with low fiscal costs. But businesses and investors need certainty that the carbon price will continue to rise over time and that carbon credits will continue to have market value. Carbon contracts for differences can provide this certainty, making it imperative that the federal government implement this proposed policy. Governments can also give businesses and investors more certainty by backing the creation of a climate investment taxonomy, which provides a common language around risks that come with the global energy transition. Canada is one of few G20 countries that doesn't already have a taxonomy, and the framework proposed by the Sustainable Finance Action Council and the Canadian Climate Institute could make Canada a leader in this field. The third insight is that clean electricity is a huge asset for Canada in the competition for global capital. The availability of clean, affordable electricity is now affecting company decisions about where projects get built. Canada already has a clear head start, with over 80% of its electricity produced with zero emissions today. Yet Canada's electricity systems must keep pace with demand that could double or triple by 2050. The scale of that challenge requires unprecedented policy action. Moving ahead with the federal government's clean electricity standard is critical to creating bigger, cleaner, and smarter electricity systems. And the proposed $25 billion in federal investment tax credits can help accelerate private sector investment toward this goal. The federal government can also play a more active role in mobilizing provincial and territorial policy to ensure that the Canadian clean electricity remains the backbone of a competitive net zero economy. The good news is that the total energy costs for Canadians could actually decrease by 12% in the transition as more people use more efficient technologies like heat pumps and electric vehicles. The fourth and final insight is that Canada's oil and gas sector faces unique challenges in the global energy transition, but that public policy can play an important role in reducing these risks. The long-term decline in global demand for fossil fuels creates a dual challenge for Canada. First, the sector must reduce its emissions to stay competitive in a market that will put a premium on low-carbon barrels. Canadian oil and gas producers are some of the most carbon-intensive in the world, and the sector has the fastest growing emissions in the country. Addressing this challenge will require large-scale investments from oil and gas companies to meet their own climate commitments. The second part of this challenge pulls in the opposite direction, as declining global demand will undermine the sector's long-term economic viability. These global shifts will increase risks to Canadian workers, communities, and governments. With the right policy package, however, the federal government can support both the short and medium-term competitiveness in the oil and gas sector. Capping oil and gas emissions can help guarantee that sectoral emissions decrease over time. Moving ahead with stronger methane regulations can deliver an estimated 1/3 of the emissions under a federal cap and can do so cost-effectively. The proposed investment tax credits for technologies like carbon capture and storage, as well as moving ahead with things like carbon contracts for differences, can help de-risk low-carbon projects. Finally, a government-backed climate investment taxonomy can help scale private investments. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important issue, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to the Canadian Labour Congress for 5 minutes.
Committee members, it's my honor and my pleasure to be here with you this morning. The Canadian Labour Congress advocates on behalf of workers all across Canada. We know that the world is changing, and Canada and Canadian workers, for them to be global winners, we know that unions need to act and workers need to act. This committee is looking explicitly at the impacts of President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and what that means for Canada. President Biden has made no secret of the fact that his plan is pro-environment, pro-union, and pro-worker. This summer, President Biden celebrated the anniversary of the IRA's passage. His statement mentioned union jobs the same number of times that he mentioned the word climate. If Canada is serious about responding to the IRA and to study how Canada creates good union jobs, the first thing that we need to do is start talking the language, talking about good union-specific jobs. Words matter, and we think we need to use those words. Biden is sending a very clear message to workers. Canada isn't sending that message, but we can. Putting that message into action will mean that Canada must create and protect good, safe, well-paid, unionized, low-carbon and no-emission jobs in energy and beyond. And that means supporting low-carbon industries like critical minerals, like low-carbon manufacturing, low-carbon supply chains, and so forth. And taking steps to ensure that jobs that are created are good jobs. It will also mean decarbonizing good work and protecting already low-carbon work. It's good to see that some work is starting of this nature to ensure that investments in decarbonizing are creating good jobs. Canada's Clean Economy Investment Tax credit labour conditions ensure workers are paid prevailing wages when companies get government help in investing in hydrogen, clean electricity, and in clean manufacturing and in carbon capture. This is a good start, although the amount of the credit attached to labour conditions should be higher to ensure that labour conditions are actually met. This committee must recognize that it is not a foregone conclusion that low-carbon jobs will be good jobs. For example, until recently, the province of Alberta had among the most rapid renewable energy growth in the country. And while some key jobs, such as crane operators installing wind turbines, are good, safe, unionized jobs, the Alberta government allowed non-qualified workers to work on major solar panels. Once light hits a panel, it's like a generator has been switched on. But instead of ensuring that this work is done safely by qualified, trained electrical workers, it's being done by people with a few weeks of training. And that's not good for workers, nor is that good for the public. Some basic ways to ensure that investing in a low-carbon economy creates good jobs would include ensuring that work is done by qualified workers, using community benefit agreements to set hiring, training, wages, and other labour standards, and addressing long-stand labour issues like list availability and penalties for unfair labour practices. At the same time, Canada must protect good low-carbon jobs. Canada has a strong manufacturing economy that has made important investments in decarbonizing. Those good jobs have to be supported to realize everyone's investments. So whether it's ensuring that clean Canadian steel can compete around the world, investing in decarbonizing industries across Canada, or ensuring industries like chemicals or automotive are going to reduce emissions, the best way to have good union jobs is to keep workers in their job, within their collective agreement, in their pension plans, and to have the work be decarbonized around them. Canada must also apply a regional lens to this work. A worker with a good job is a foundation for their community. The IRA's Energy Commitment Bonus attacks tax credits when jobs are created in communities that are historically tied to coal. The CLC is working on recommendations for how Canada can support the diversification of the economies of communities tied to high emissions industries so that communities can continue to thrive and to grow. Whether Canada is protecting or decarbonizing work or supporting the creation of new jobs, it is very clear to us that workers will need the skills to take advantage of these changes. They need to go from the skills that they have today to the skills that are going to be needed in a net zero economy. And so for workers, that means retraining because they're entering new fields. For others, it might mean upskilling because their industry or their jobs are changing. In either case, workers have to be able to access accredited, recognized training that prepares them for that real job. That means investing in accredited, not-for-profit institutions like our world-leading union training centres or our public college systems. Finally, workers have to be at the table. As the economy changes, work that people do will change. Workers are the experts, both in what they do and how they do it and in what we need. And we are pleased to see that the Sustainable Jobs Act is being debated. Canada's unions have been vocal in calling for strong labour representation in the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council. And we are supportive of all of the measures that ensure that workers are at the table discussing and bargaining changes with their employers and governments where appropriate.
Thank you for your opening statement. Right on time. We'll now go to Dr. Heather Exner-Pirot from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute by video conference for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'll focus my remarks on 3 areas: critical minerals, investment tax credits, and nuclear energy. There's widespread consensus in the resource sector that we are not competitive enough in attracting investment in this country, and that Canada's businesses, workers, and economy have suffered as a result. While we enjoy a tremendous natural resource endowment, our regulatory and policy environment is inefficient and cannot support the investment and activity required to meet our net zero goals. According to the Natural Resources Major Projects Inventory, the value of projects planned or under construction in Canada since 2015 has fallen by 31%, from $711 billion to $520 billion. This does not account for inflation either. Critical minerals are the foundation for a transition from an energy system based on fossil fuels to one based on renewables and electrification. The International Energy Association has suggested we need 6 times more critical mineral production by 2040 to meet our net zero goals. And for some minerals like lithium, graphite, cobalt, and nickel, more than 20 times as much. EVs and electricity networks make up the bulk of this demand. We are nowhere near increasing mining production enough globally or domestically to meet net zero goals. In fact, in 2022, world mining production was less than it was in 2019. Far from rapidly increasing mineral production, we have plateaued. Global mining capital expenditures are about 2/3 of its peak in the last commodities boom in 2012, and global mining finance, debt, and equity is about 1/3 of its peak in 2013. The reasons for this include declining ore grades, high costs of capital, volatile commodity prices, growing regulatory burdens, supply chain pressures, and an aging workforce. Similarly, in Canada, despite strong rhetorical support, critical minerals production is actually declining, not growing. Natural Resources Canada released its annual mining production results in mid-April, confirming that we produce less copper, cobalt, nickel, zinc, uranium, and platinum group metals in 2022 than we did in 2019. Canada has tremendous geological potential, but we are not realizing it. Most of our allies are net mineral importers, not exporters. They are depending on us to be a reliable and growing source of minerals, and we are not stepping up. Next, investment tax credits, or ITCs. ITCs are the most important tool of the Inflation Reduction Act to stimulate investment and growth. To compete, the Canadian federal government has committed to developing ITCs for clean technologies in its last 3 budgets. As of today, none are in force. While draft legislation has been published for CCUS and clean technologies, the ITCs for hydrogen, clean manufacturing, and clean electricity remain conceptual, and these are of limited use to firms or investors considering projects in Canada. Delays in finalizing the terms and conditions of each ITC through law effectively freezes capital and diminishes Canada's ability to achieve its emissions reductions targets. There's also a perception in the business community that Canada's ITCs are overly complex and inconsistent with the objective of using tax policy to attract higher levels of investment. Clawback provisions, different phase-out schedules, narrow and confusing eligibility criteria, knowledge sharing requirements, and high-level auditing risk are just some of the provisions discouraging investment. Not all is lost. The nuclear sector in Canada shows what's possible when Liberals and Conservatives and the provinces and the federal government have common goals, as well as a regulator that actually supports rather than frustrates development. Canada is emerging as a global leader in the development of advanced reactors, as well as continuing to commercially develop its iconic CANDU technology. We are leveraging our incredible uranium reserves and nuclear expertise to not only decarbonize domestically and help advance the energy security of our allies in Eastern Europe and elsewhere, but to build a globally competitive supply chain around nuclear engineering, advanced manufacturing, and services. Although the IAA adds redundancy and regulatory burden, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission itself is world-class and actually provides a competitive advantage to our nuclear industry as they develop new reactor models. With that example in mind, there's much more to be done to achieve our clean energy plans. Working Canadians and industry share a goal of a strong economy and a healthy environment, but we will not have either unless our policy and regulatory environment improves. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Net Zero Advisory Body Dan Wicklum, who's by video conference. Sir, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the committee for the invite. I want to acknowledge I'm coming to you from Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, and this has also been a gathering place for Métis and other Indigenous peoples other than Treaty 7 signatories. So I'm coming to you as the chair of the Net Zero Advisory Body. We were created in 2021 under the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, and we provide the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change with independent advice on interim emission reduction targets leading up to 2050. We give advice on the most likely pathways that will make sure Canada is a competitive net zero emissions jurisdiction by 2050. And we also deal with any matter referred to us by the minister. We're a group of 13 members from all regions of Canada with a diverse and established expertise in a range of fields. And I have two main points. The first one I'm not going to belabor because everyone that's already spoken to you has made that point up front, and that is emissions reductions and climate change is now no longer just about emissions reductions and climate change. Emissions reductions is now a competitiveness issue. Every major economy is retooling itself on the planet to make sure that they can reduce their emissions. And they now understand with this remarkable change in our economy that they will either position themselves to win economically in the future, and if they don't, they will lose. This is the fundamental difference or change that has happened in the last few years. Emissions reductions is now about competitiveness. The second major point is that there's actually more certainty than uncertainty when it comes to the technologies and approaches we need to get to net zero. For 30 years, we've been trying to reduce emissions, and we have many options to do that. We keep our similar systems, we just have to make them more efficient. But if the objective now is to get to zero emissions under net zero definitions, there's actually much fewer pathways and much fewer technologies and technology configurations that can truly be a net zero society. So in some regard, although it's not simpler, or it's not easier, it is more simple because the technologies are actually more limited. There's more certainty than uncertainty. So where does this leave Canada? To be clear, the government of Canada has done much. We've had billions deployed and still have billions in various funds. Budget 2023 introduced many investment tax credits, but we're chasing a moving target. Our major trading partners and our competitors are moving extremely quickly and extremely deliberately to position their economy to be able to compete and win in what is a fundamentally retooling global economy tracking to net zero. So what would it take for Canada to be more deliberate and bring all of the pieces that we have together into a more coherent strategy? Number one, we think we need to do a more deliberate analysis of what Canada's unique competitive advantages are. To date, most of our programs and policies have been more of a blanket approach, but we're not going to compete economically in terms of the amount of money that we invest or spend with larger economies. We need to be more deliberate and more targeted. We need to start with that analysis. We need an approach that aligns the supports and policies with those inherent advantages. The Transition Accelerator and Clean Prosperity has just completed an apples to the extent possible, comparison of the US competitiveness versus the Canadian competitive environment in terms of supports and incentives, regulations, and policy across a range of technologies that will absolutely be required in a net zero world, from different types of hydrogen, electric vehicle batteries, sustainable aviation fuel. In some cases, we stack up well. In other cases, we don't stack up well at all. So aligning our supports with these Canadian advantages is something that the Net Zero Advisory Body feels very strongly about. Aligning the demand side. So with this difficult confederation, a confederation that is sometimes difficult to navigate, we see municipalities in some cases taking a very strong leadership role, some provinces taking a very strong leadership role, and the federal government also clearly has a foundational role in driving the economy to net zero, but doing better in aligning interests and approaches across the three levels of government with Indigenous interests, although difficult, really seems to be something that we need to put more thought into and make more progress on. Another thing that we feel very strongly about is having plans that are implementable. For example, if we have a hydrogen strategy for Canada, we feel very strongly that we have to have competitiveness goals embedded in the strategy to understand, for example, how much hydrogen, at what price, at what carbon intensity we need to use in Canada by when, if we're actually going to track a deliberate pathway to net zero. It's only with this concept of quantitative competitiveness goals can we assess whether or not we're making sufficient progress on the key economies, key sectors that we need to get to net zero, or whether or not we need to retool or adjust our approach in order to make sufficient progress.
Mr. Wicklum, I'd ask you to just wrap up, please.
The last point is that we think the civil service has clearly a strong role, and we think the modeling and policy capacity could be bolstered considering the economic stakes that we have in this retooling global economy. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Unifor Quebec, Mr. Daniel Cloutier, by video conference.
Hello, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present our point of view on this issue. Unifor members are active in all areas of our economy. So in all areas of our economy, aerospace industry, energy, forestry, the food industry, and this includes some industrial sectors that are facing rapid transformations associated with efforts to decarbonize and protect biodiversity. From the natural resources sector to the manufacturing world, all fields are concerned: automotive and bus manufacturing, aluminum, energy, aerospace, forestry, and the list goes on. Our members work on the front lines. Major shifts are underway. They create historic opportunities, but they also raise crucial issues for the future of workers. Will the same number of employees be needed, for example, to work on electric vehicles that contain fewer parts than those that we know today? Or, facing the shift in the aluminum sector, will we need as many workers when electrolytic cell anodes have to be changed every 30 months rather than every 30 days? Will we take into account the costs of the decarbonization efforts that we're undertaking within our industries when they compete with products from less environmentally friendly countries? Will there be an adjustment at the border? Will this new green decarbonized economy be synonymous with good, well-paid jobs filled by workers able to exercise their right of association? Unifor strongly supports the transition to clean energy. This being said, we're very vigilant about the risk of this transformation, that it become an excuse for destroying good unionized jobs. We don't have to choose between decent pensions, health and safety expertise in years of gains we fought for, and the creation of new precarious jobs in a so-called green economy. The reality is that this transition is not unfolding everywhere in the same way, nor at the same speed, and that's why support mechanisms need to be adapted and flexible. Unifor believes in a global approach based on compensatory and transformative measures. While it's a given that in some situations, support measures will be compensatory in nature, aimed at ensuring income security, for example, or facilitating requalification, we believe that in most other cases, measures should be aimed above all at accompanying the transformation of existing activities and jobs and helping workplaces to make the shift to decarbonization. This is a colossal task and one that will become increasingly important over the coming decades. To meet the challenge, we need an industrial strategy that thinks big and brings coherence. We need intelligent investment and targeted support for workers in key sectors. We've seen, for example, how the Inflation Reduction Act of the U.S. has changed the game, but also everywhere else. By some estimates, those from Climate Power, an NGO, we're talking about nearly 300 clean energy projects in over 40 states that have created no fewer than 170,000 jobs, and that is impressive. Canada's no exception. The last budget provided nearly 80 billion in similar incentives from Volkswagen to Northvolt. We see that these efforts have paid off. We believe that these substantial investments of public funds must come with strings attached. Last January, during the consultation on clean energy and hydrogen credits, we gave concrete examples of what we are suggesting. For example, the introduction of a wage floor, the use of apprentice ratios of 10 to 15% to alleviate labor shortages and ensure skills transfer. The need to extend these credits beyond new project construction activities. Assurances of the neutrality of beneficiary companies during unionization activities. In conclusion, I would like to express our appreciation for the language used by the federal government in its latest budget. Specifically, I'm referring to the mention of the role of unions as stakeholders in the sustainable jobs process. Unifor believes that to be fair, the transition must be planned, fueled by social dialogue, and above all, must involve the unions. With the creation of the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council, Bill C-50 offers us the opportunity to go to action. But to do so, we'll need to clarify the current text to ensure that 1/3 of the Council's seats are reserved for labor organizations. It's not too late to improve the bill. Thank you for your attention, and I remain available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Couche, for your opening remarks and statement. Thank you all members for your opening statements. We'll now go to our first round of questions for 6 minutes each, and we'll start with Shannon Stubbs from the Conservative Party of Canada. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. Ms. Brusque, I apologize because you said it in the beginning. Okay. Just because of limited time, I'm just wondering if you could make sure after the committee meeting to table with the committee just the sources and the material, all the information that you were talking about when it came to your comments around Alberta. Now, just because as Conservatives have been clear, we want to cut red tape, cut timelines, make Canada competitive, efficient, predictable, and certain. And particularly, we would like the private sector to make those investments and create all those jobs. So just to that end, my questions will focus on questions for private sector proponents. So to the members of the Chamber, the representatives of the Chamber of Commerce and of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, you both commented in different ways about the importance of clarity, certainty, predictability. Could you, at the outset, explain the importance of those factors when it comes to regulatory timelines, business rules, to the private sector proponents' consideration of what makes a business case for a long-term, major, multi-billion, million and billion-dollar investment? I guess first to the Chambers of Commerce and then to the MLA.
Thank you for the question. Just waiting for my mic, Chair. There we are. Thank you for the question. So, yes, we need certainty, we need clarity, we need some transparency, and that goes through everything from a business's ability to know whether or not it will be eligible to the speed at which a decision is made. The Macdonald-Laurier Institute spoke compellingly as well of the audit risk and the other factors that come into play in a decision by a business to put private capital. What we need to do, and what is very important, is to have long-term private sector funded growth of our net zero economy. And for those decisions to be made over the long term, there needs to be that certainty. If we look at the IRA in the United States, it was passed in August of 22. We've had a series of signals from government on the sorts of investment tax credits and other program elements that will be introduced. A full year has gone by, and then some. We're now in the fourth quarter of 2023. Investment decisions for 2024 are largely already made. If we're lucky, major projects may be starting to move in a year's time from now, if we're lucky. And so what we're talking about is a 2-year to 3-year lag. There's already funding coming out of the U.S. for these major projects, and we're that far behind.
It seems, of course, clear that it would be impossible for Canada to compete with this lack of certainty and clarity and predictability in our own framework when the competitive country has already deployed all of these measures. If anybody wants to expand more on the differences between the ITC models, so far as you understand them in Canada, which are exclusionary of certain technologies and sectors, versus how that stacks up to the U.S. model, I think that would be helpful. You may want to comment, if you do, on the importance of production tax credits and how that might stack up. But I think what's very clear between the reality that the U.S. has already deployed all these efforts, and Canada can't spiral down a race on subsidies, so therefore Canada has to improve every single other thing in our control. Given the MLI's comments about the reality, too, that now we're producing critical minerals and metals less in 2022 than we were in 2019, and and also knowing that in Canada it takes anywhere from 10 to 25 years for a mine to go from production to concept. Would you want to explain more how this lack of certainty that impacts the business case decisions of private sector proponents will actually hamper the deployment of clean technology, hamper private sector clean investment and job creation, and also, as you've articulated, keep Canada from being able to meet the net zero goals that politicians promise?
I think what I would say to that is it was mentioned in our opening statement, but I think Canada needs to find its competitive advantage, and that competitive advantage can be our regulatory framework. I think many people have mentioned that we're not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with bigger economies, so our regulatory framework has to be our strength. And the positive thing about that is that, for the most part, having an efficient regulatory framework will not cost significantly. It might not cost anything at all. So I think those are measures that can allow Canada to be extremely competitive without necessarily having to spend significantly more money.
Right, and that should be moved on aggressively. Also, of course, in the awkward situation where a government's been in place for 8 years, so they'd also be, I guess, fixing the regulatory mess over which they've presided and partially created. But maybe we can give the representative from the MLI also a chance to get in on this discussion before we run out of time, Chair.
I'll try to be quick. The main challenges I hear is duplication, redundancy, the long timelines, and political risk. That until there's actually shovels in the ground, there could be a designation, there could be a veto. And what the Business Council of Alberta said eloquently was that ultimately what needs to happen is the CEO needs to be able to go to their board and say with some certainty what a cost of a project will be and what the timeline of that project will be, so they can make a business case for it and plan for it. And that's not possible in Canada right now. I'll just say, a colleague of mine who's actually in the nuclear renewable space, not oil and gas, in New York, emailed me following the IEA decision, says they're watching, major multinational firm is watching the IEA changes. Right now, they internally call the Impact Assessment Act the Don't Invest in Canada Act. I've heard that we're a Don't Invest in Canada Act, that we're a banana republic, there is quiet quitting, and the numbers all support this. So we're at 17.9 years in Canada to build a mine. I wish it was 10 to 15 years.
Thank you. We'll now go to Vivienne Lapointe from the Liberal Party for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Arnold. In terms of the economic and political considerations for clean energy transitions, there is a lot of misinformation regarding pollution pricing and carbon capture policies. Can you share your insights on how the Inflation Reduction Act may influence carbon pricing policy and targets in Canada, and how we can communicate the urgency of climate change to Canadians who really are struggling with paying more for fossil fuel items like gas and home heating oil?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. As I mentioned in my opening statements, we see Canada's carbon pricing system as an advantage in responding to the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. It is one of the most, or if not the most, economically efficient way to go about regulating or pricing emissions, and does so with a relatively low fiscal cost. And we see that the next big step that Canada needs to take is implementing carbon contracts for differences that can essentially give businesses and investors some insurance that the price on carbon will rise according to its existing schedule, and so that it becomes essentially bankable. That's often a term that we hear about with the production tax credits in the U.S. is that these are bankable. Well, putting a price on carbon and wrapping carbon contracts for difference around that makes that bankable, just as the investment tax credits are bankable. In terms of affordability, obviously, a revenue neutral carbon tax is a critical plank to ensuring that, and especially ensuring that the ways in which that revenues, those revenues are returned to households is important in terms of making the whole system more progressive for the lowest income Canadians. So there are multiple ways on how to do that. And in many cases, the Canadian government is already taking that approach. I just think that there's lots of opportunities to really leverage instruments like carbon contracts for differences, as well as investment tax credits. And then on the private sector side, implementing a climate investment taxonomy can give businesses and investors more certainty to invest in a clean economy.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. And the another question I have for you is, how can we bring Canadians together to move forward on clean technology without people or industries feeling as though they are being unfairly affected by environmental policies?
That is a very big question. I think a lot of it needs to be about the benefits associated with the technologies that Mr. Wicklund was talking about in terms of getting us to a net zero pathway. A lot of these technologies are more efficient. Oftentimes they're better from a user experience perspective, and they're also more affordable. So the analysis that we've done at the Institute shows that switch to electrification can actually save Canadians money on their energy costs or on their energy bills. And it's those types of data points and statistics and running the numbers that I think can really make it clear that this isn't just about climate. It isn't just about energy. It is about moving to an energy system and to products that are going to make people's lives better. And I think there's lots of opportunities there that aren't yet being captured.
Thank you. My next question is for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I'm the MP for Sudbury, and as you can imagine, the role of mining and critical minerals in Canada's clean energy transition is always top of mind. We know that we can't have a clean energy transition. There is no net zero without critical minerals. But I think we need to look beyond large multinational companies and large government subsidies. We also need to focus on the smaller businesses and innovators right here at home. What opportunities do you see in our domestic market as well as international markets for value chain and supply chain opportunities for our small and medium-sized businesses?
Well, I would say there are many mining projects that hopefully will be developed in Canada in the coming years. And with those projects come incredible jobs and opportunities for the people and the communities in the regions. I myself represent many members who are collaborating with their local communities, with Indigenous communities, and they're talking about all the jobs that could be created, the opportunities for training, the opportunities for education. And of course, with these mining projects also comes incredible infrastructure. A lot of these projects, as you would know, are probably in more remote locations in the country. So you have to build roads, you have to build broadband. And that also comes with jobs and opportunities. So the critical minerals that we have in Canada and the projects that we'll be hopefully building with some smaller junior mining companies will create incredible opportunities for many regions across the country.
And quickly, which policies or provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act do you believe could have a significant impact on Canada's economic competitiveness?
Well, I know that there are many policies as part of the Inflation Reduction Act and other acts that the United States government have put forward that Canadian companies could benefit from. There is, for example, the Department of Defense funding that Canadian mining companies are eligible for, and I know there are a few that have put forward white papers and would hopefully benefit from that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Point. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard from the Bloc Québécois for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Georges.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you all the same question. You probably know that a report will be produced within the scope of this study, and it's always very positive to understand what the witnesses are saying. So in this sense, in a plan produced by the government with regards to clean energy, I'd like to know if, in your opinion, it is essential for us to have mechanisms of carbon pricing to begin with, and secondly, knowing that the sector that produces the highest amount of greenhouse gases is the oil and gas sector. So do you agree to say that we also need standards to reduce the carbon intensity of the oil and gas sector? I'll begin with the gentleman from the Chamber of Commerce.
Merci, Monsieur le député.
Thank you. First of all, when we're talking about carbon pricing, I think that at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, we are for carbon pricing. All we want, though, is to have a certain level of certainty around this. Otherwise, industry cannot move ahead and cannot obtain funding. I don't have a lot of time, so I'd ask you for brief answers. Thank you very much. Thank you. Same thing for Mrs. Bresky.
Callahan, our Director of Environment, to give you context.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think the CLC has intervened in the past on the constitutionality of carbon pricing and is supportive of it as a way to give clarity. As far as the broader piece of the economy, I think that it's important to have regulation and to have incentives to get us to where we need to get. I think the thing to remember in all of this, of course, is what this means for working workers, because there are opportunities in change, and we can either get those opportunities or we can miss those opportunities.
Merci, Monsieur Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I'm sorry, but my time is really limited. The same question now for Mr. Arnold.
Yes, thank you. The Canadian Climate Institute has been unequivocal that carbon pricing should be the foundation of Canada's climate policy strategy, as well as contracts for differences to ensure that price rises over time. Specifically for the oil and gas sector, we have also been supportive of introducing a cap on oil and gas emissions to ensure that they come down over time, complemented by investment tax credits, as well as strong methane regulations and an investment taxonomy. Thank you.
Merci. Madame.
Thank you. Mrs. Exner-Bureau, do you have the same vision?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Alberta oil and gas is subject to carbon pricing through the Alberta tier system. I don't hear a lot of complaints about that. I think it's an effective mechanism. It's all the other layers of pancaked regulation, I think, that is detrimental. I also think the committee should consider not just clean energy in the climate, but also energy security. According to S&P Global, if you impose that emissions cap, we would reduce production by 1.3 million barrels. This would be absolutely detrimental to the energy system and to global security supply, especially what's happening with Russia and Middle East.
Mais juste clairement, vous êtes en faveur.
But you are in favor of a mechanism for carbon pricing, that's correct?
Yes, the one that's in place, I have no problem with.
Merci.
Thank you. Same question for Mr. Wicklum and Mr. Cloutier, perhaps, quickly. Well, quickly, for us, the answer is yes and yes.
C'est clair et concis. Monsieur.
That's clear and concise. Mr. Wicklum, to end.
I think for the Net Zero Advisory Body, the advisory body takes a look at expert advice and from economists that has been for decades that one of the most efficient mechanisms is a carbon price. I think there's a question about efficiency related to whether it's a public-facing carbon price or whether it's an industrial carbon price. The reality is that the carbon price on the oil and gas sector is incompletely administered. So there are exemptions that apply to different companies and in different regions. One of the key things that we would like to see is cleaning up of the exemptions so that we get full benefit from the pricing of emissions from the oil and gas sector.
Merci. Mais clairement, vous êtes en faveur d'un mécanisme de tarification.
Thank you, but you are in favor of carbon pricing. scenario. So my second question, I'll ask the gentleman from the Chamber of Commerce. You talked about transparency, clarity. So there seems to be a consensus. Most witnesses said that they do agree with carbon pricing, and we need standards on the carbon intensity of oil and gas. Now, if a government sends out a message that they're going to take this direction, it might be ill-advised for opposition parties to defend a contrary opinion. Perhaps this sent a message to the business community that's unclear, and it is not necessarily based on certainty. Do you agree with me on this?
Thank you, Monsieur le Député. What I can say is that the certainty piece is very important to our members to make and sustain the large private sector investments that are required for the energy transformation. And so with a carbon price in place, contracts for difference are certainly an important mechanism that can be considered here. Another one, though, is that we're talking about over half of the TSX are energy companies and energy investment, and we need to be working with these players to transition fuel mixing, sustainable aviation fuel, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, a whole host of different investments that are required. And so we need to move those companies to diversify and work with them and encourage them.
Merci.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Angus from the New Democratic Party for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This is a fascinating discussion because I see right across the political spectrum the need for certainty, the need to move beyond aspirational, and actually these incredible tax credits, where are they? We need to get them happening now. In light, I think, particularly because our biggest competitor has moved so far ahead so quickly. Ms. Prescott, I'm going to start with you because you represent people whose jobs are on the line. You know, in the very first week of the Biden administration, he signed an executive order to start a committee to start looking at energy-dependent areas and how that they would be part of a transition. So this was the focus from the get-go. He went to COP26 and he said that they were going to create good-paying union jobs, which sent a real message that this was going to be about an economic transformation. How important is it that we move quickly, clearly, with an all-of-government approach so that workers are not left behind?
Thank you for that question. Workers certainly need certainty, and they are very concerned about what their future holds. They're concerned when they see that the IRA is moving the needle ahead so much further than where we are at, and other economies are also following that with investments. And so workers are concerned that if there are not clear directions given shortly as to how their industry is going to be impacted and how their communities are going to be impacted, they will in fact be left behind, and those good family and community-sustaining jobs are at risk. And so we need to be able to move quickly on these issues. Workers need to be at the table to have conversations with the employers and with governments about what that transition looks like. We need to find solutions to upskilling and to reskilling. And workers know their industries and they know their employers, and they're well positioned to be part of that conversation. The risk for us as well, if we don't start having these conversations and including workers, is that we're going to have a brain drain in Canada. Those highly skilled workers that we're also going to need to rely on as we transition will be looking for other pastures, and we're going to be at risk of losing those folks.
I think for much of the 2000s and that sort of the overall regional economic problems that Canada had, severe regional economic problems, were somehow masked in some ways by the incredible boom that was happening in Fort Mac. I don't know how many people from my region were on those contract planes flying in, flying out, 12 days in, 12 days out. But those big oil and gas construction jobs seem to have been gone. So your members working, in the refineries and the plants will tend to be there. They will have representation. Yet people who have to fly back home to Miramichi or other, rural parts of Canada, they're just not getting the call to come back. So how important is it that we have a plan for workers who, in that fly-in, fly-out economy, are not going to get the representation that your unions would provide, but also in terms of the regional roundtables? That we have a regional roundtable that makes sure that those voices, to make sure that investments are sustainable so workers who have gone back to rural regions are going to have jobs.
Rural and northern communities are definitely very concerned about these issues, and workers in those communities that have traditionally traveled for work would like to stay in their home communities. We see that all the time, or would like to return to their home communities. So the regional tables and having the regional partners at the table, whether that's regional employers or regional governments, is going to be critically important to figuring out how investments can be utilized to actually create good community and family sustaining jobs. It cannot just be any job. It can't be a precarious job. It has to be a family and community sustaining job. And so you need workers at the table, you need workers' input, and you need workers' dedication and knowledge that they're bringing to those conversations.
Thank you for that. Mr. Holmes, I just want to ask you a couple of questions in this first round. I used to be on the board of directors of our little local Chamber of Commerce. We have a lot of small businesses, and in the summers, business goes up. We came through the brutality of COVID and lost so much, but the summer after COVID, things were great. This past summer, people didn't come, and I was trying to figure out what it was, and then someone said, it's the smoke and the fires. People are afraid to travel. So I just read the KPMG report that says, 60% of small businesses were directly impacted. A good percentage had disruptions to supply chain. Staggering number talked about damage to their properties and to the uncertainty. Have you looked at a cost of what it's costing small and medium-sized businesses from the climate crisis that we're facing?
Thank you, Mr. Angus, for the question. We have not, to my knowledge, costed that out. I myself am not an economist. We do have a chief economist on staff, Dr. Stephen Tapp. But it is an area that we're increasingly being called on by our membership to look at and consider the disruption to businesses, small businesses. It's also an issue that affects our trade corridors and major supply chains. If you think of floods in Nova Scotia, fires in British Columbia and across the country this year, or labor disruptions as well, there is an incredible acute bottlenecking that's happening within our supply chain right now, and that affects all levels of business, and it's quite concerning for us at the Chamber.
So how important is it that we have to have an economy that's based on sustainable jobs, but also the need that we're addressing this increasing pressure on our small businesses, because our small businesses can't survive. After COVID, we can't have a summer or 2 summers or 3 summers of people not coming and traveling because they're afraid that they're going to be chased out by the smoke.
Well, I think coming out of COVID, there were an incredible array of interventions and government supports for businesses, and we appreciated that, and we were in regular dialogue with the government on those. Coming out of it now, I think we need to look at what are the root causes of various elements of these disruptions. So some of those could be climate-related, some of those will be financial, some of those are sectors that are still living the reality of the pandemic. High service-based sectors like restaurants and tourism operators that are still impacted. What I would prefer to see is, rather than a blanket approach, a very targeted programming that addresses the needs of those small businesses that are most impacted.
Chair, just through you, if you wouldn't mind, maybe it would be helpful every once in a while to just encourage everyone to stay on the topic of the study. Just when questioning witnesses. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Tubbs. Yes, Mr. Angus?
I don't know why I keep getting all these subjects of points of order from my Conservative colleagues, but I don't bother asking them what to ask, so they have no business telling me what to ask. I'll ask what I'm going to ask. If she doesn't like it, she can run against me in Timmins James Bay.
Thank you.
I'm very happy where I am in Lakeland, but thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I would ask everybody to focus on the study at hand and ask questions pertaining to the study at hand, the best way you think that approach should be taken. We'll now move to Mr. Patzer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute quickly here. I'm just wondering, do you want to just clarify, was it the Alberta tier system that you said that you preferred in your previous comments?
Yeah, so it's been in place, as you might know, for many years. I think industry supports broadly having carbon mechanisms. They're working very hard, as you know, themselves to reduce their emissions.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I just want to follow up on another point here. When we look at what's going on, you mentioned something about energy security as well, too. And we look at what's happening around the world. Just wondering, is there a moral case to be made for Canadian LNG around the world?
Well, there's a moral, an environmental, and a local economic case to be made for LNG, and it's been made probably in 100 different ways in the last 2 years. So again, reducing emissions from burning of coal is very clear, increasing the economy in BC and in Western Canada, and could be also in Newfoundland and Quebec. And obviously there's incredible Indigenous ownership and participation in many of these LNG projects. So certainly opening up that. And then obviously just, Canada's economy, the productivity, the economic GDP per capita has been declining, increasing LNG, as the United States has done, as Australia has done, as Qatar has done, as Asian companies increase their LNG import capacity, as European countries increase their LNG import capacity, make decades-long contracts with Middle Eastern countries that obviously everyone would prefer if Canada could be their supplier.
Yeah, and it seems like the only one who doesn't think there's a business case is the Prime Minister of Canada, obviously. And, these other jurisdictions, it's obviously reliable, it's affordable, but it's also clean, right? It's clean energy?
Is far more clean than coal. I think everyone in this committee would know that. The important thing also is it emits almost no black carbon, whereas obviously coal does. So from a pollution perspective, from a human health perspective, in Asia, where they're increasing emissions from coal, it would be a far preferable solution. We have to stop looking at what's a perfect solution and look at what's good solutions. And Canadian LNG is a very good solution.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, Chair, I'm going to move the motion that I put on notice, that in light of multiple news outlets reporting that Qatar is housing the leadership of Hamas, and given the fact that Qatar is now the preferred choice to supply liquefied natural gas to our G7 allies in Germany, France, and Japan, and given the fact that Qatar and Shell have signed a supply deal for the Netherlands, the committee recognized that there is not only a business case for Canadian LNG, but a moral case as well, and that this committee report to the House its recommendation that the Liberal government champion the export of Canadian LNG. And this is important because there was a CBC article actually that came out the other day highlighting this. And so I did raise it. We raised it here in committee last week. I raised it on the floor of the House of Commons in question period, and it was actually dismissed as being a conspiracy theory by the parliamentary secretary. But yeah, no, the CBC article, it says right here, on October 7th, as Hamas gunmen rampaged across southern Israel, a group of middle-aged men in a luxury suite in Doha, Qatar, gathered in front of a camera. Hamas leaders recorded themselves showing surprise about the attacks in the news on a large screen television, and then kneeling to give kneeling to give thanks for what had happened there. So on one hand, they're trying to talk about both sides of the mouth, but it doesn't change the point that Qatar is supplying the world with LNG, but yet they're also housing the leadership team of Hamas. So I think it's important to show that we take this issue very seriously, because this is an energy security issue, and Canada has the opportunity to play a role here. And we have heard over and over that Canada has the capacity to be the global supplier for LNG, but the government has left multiple countries in the dark on this. In fact, we had the German Chancellor come over to Canada asking for LNG, and that's the famous quote where the Prime Minister said that there was not a business case for it, despite the fact that Germany came specifically saying that Canada would be the best and most preferred option for LNG around the world. After that, we had Japan come, and Japan also was asking for Canadian LNG. Then the Prime Minister once again declined that as well. And then now we start to see how the world market is shaping up here. So there's actually 5 countries, because this morning Italy was another one to join the mix and sign a 27-year agreement with Qatar to supply their LNG. So you've got Italy as of this morning. Over the weekend, I think the Netherlands also signed a big agreement as well. And then the 3 that I just listed there being Japan, and France was that was the 5th one that I didn't mention, was France, and Germany and Japan there. So we have multiple countries who came to Canada offering the business case for it. They were told no, that there was in fact not a business case. But now we're up to 5 countries around the world that have signed 27-year agreements with Qatar to supply them. So And when you look at the future of it here, you've got Qatar Energy will contribute 40% of all new LNG to the market by 2029. Now, this is the same Qatar that I got an executive summary from a human rights report here. I'm just going to read this here. Significant human rights issues included credible reports of serious restrictions on free expression, including the existence of criminal libel laws, substantial interference with the freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of association, including overly restrictive laws on the organization, funding, or operation of non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations, restrictions on migrant workers' freedom of movement, access to justice, and vulnerability to abuses, including forced labor, inability of citizens to change their government peacefully in free and fair elections, serious and unreasonable restrictions on political participation, including a complete prohibition on political parties, lack of investigation and accountability for gender-based violence, existence of laws criminalizing consensual same-sex sexual conduct, and prohibitions on independent trade unions. So, I mean, that's pretty damning right there, I would suggest. And I have the floor right now, Mr. Angus, so you can just wait. There's another good report here that talks about, boy, I hope I'll say this right. I'm going to say that we'll say Nepali. People from the country of Nepal. I probably got that wrong, but this summer, Nepali workers died at a rate of almost one a day in Qatar. Many of them young men who had died of sudden heart attacks. The investigation found evidence to suggest that thousands of these people, who make up the single largest group of laborers in Qatar, face exploitation and abuses that amount to modern-day slavery, as defined by the International Labor Organization. So, and that was from the build-up to the World Cup. And there were multiple reports of abuses of human rights in that country in the build-up to that. There was many people who died in the build-up to that event. But as we look at who's providing energy for the world, it's going to be Qatar. Qatar is providing the LNG for the world, for Europe, for Asia. We've heard that LNG would be the preferred product to be able to get countries off of coal. That would have a substantive effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions around the world, which I think is what the goal is overall, right? I mean, supposed to be. Right here, we're talking about what Canada can do. I mean, let's remember that Canada is only 1.6% of global emissions, but Canadian LNG could help bring global emissions down, because we hear so often that it's a global issue, that climate change knows no borders, but yet we have the product and a solution right here in our country that could be helping the world. And we were told that there was no business case. So,
and 18 LNG proposals have been made.
There was 18 LNG proposals.
And not a single one is built or operating.
Not a single one. Yeah, not a single one's been built or operating. There's one that might, in a few years, be able to put some out, but there was 18 proposed, and none of them are operational right now. Okay, after 8 years. So, I think that's it's important to note that we could have been in a position to be able to do this if it would have been prioritized, but it definitely wasn't. So that's why I think this motion is important. It's a way for us to signal that the Natural Resources Committee actually does care about resource development, and that we do support what the private sector can do and should be doing in this country. And I think we have a golden opportunity to send a signal here as a committee together that Canada does support LNG, that there is a case for it, and that the House of Commons that would recognize that. So I think our committee should be taking this motion seriously and be looking to pass that along. I touched on a few very important points, such as human rights, such as the moral case that Canadian energy can and should play around the world, but also there's the business case as well too. So that way we can. We like to talk a lot about the social programs that we have here in this country, and one of the best ways to fund that is through our natural resource sector development. We definitely know what the benefits that the oil and gas sector has provided to this country in terms of taxation and royalties, so that way people are able to have these valued social programs. In fact, just the other day, and even on a big scale and small scale, small scale, for example, one of the local curling clubs, there's an energy company, an oil and gas company, that was sponsoring an event so kids could have their curling fees paid for so that they can enjoy and learn a new sport. And that's coming from an oil and gas company. It's just a small token item, but it's an important one. We look at our community rinks, we look at our community buildings, we look at our schools, we look at our hospitals, we look at our long-term care centers. Some of the major funding partners in them are oil and gas companies.
And 90% of Canadian oil and gas companies have fewer than 100 employees.
And they're also, lots of them fit the small business bid. That's exactly right. And a lot of them are non-unionized as well, too. I think it's important to note that while there are unionized employees, it's important to note that there are several who aren't necessarily unionized either, because there is that trickle-down effect, right? Because there's all the support businesses that go alongside of it. So, I mean, yes, it's important to have these good-paying union jobs that we talk about, but not everybody works for a union. In fact, there's been some communities there, it's upwards of 90% of the jobs in the industry aren't unionized, and they're still good-paying jobs with good value. So, I think it's
unionized jobs right now is the expansions of energy companies.
Exactly.
Point of order.
That's exactly
point
right.
Of order.
So,
Mr. Patsarautis,
can't have two people speaking at the same time. So can she just stop, or are you going to give her the floor?
I have the floor.
Thank you.
I have the floor, Charlie.
She seems to have the floor.
No, I have the floor.
Are you going to have two at the same time?
If my
Colleagues, I'm going to ask everybody to respect each other. The individual has the floor. Let's not have others speaking, whether it's your colleagues or whether it's other folks from across the floor. Let the member who has the floor finish his remarks so we can give other members an opportunity to move forward. Mr. Patzer, the floor is yours. Are you concluding, or are you still continuing?
Oh no, I've got lots of things here that I can keep going. I've had the floor all along, in fact, actually. So, you know what? It's nice to have multiple colleagues with me around the table, though. It sure is nice, and you know what? I respect all the things that my colleagues have to say. So I appreciate the input that I do get. So I'm going to. Yeah, let's get back to the business case here, because I think that's of utmost importance, because that was supposedly the biggest thing that was going to prevent Canada from being the LNG provider for around the world. So let's see here. As recently as May, Canada said it was in talks with a few companies to possibly accelerate LNG projects there that could ship gas to Europe within a few years, right? You know, we've heard multiple people, though, talking about some of the timeline issues. We've been hearing that throughout this study as well. So, but the business case is, I mean, it's right there. There's some good numbers in, I was talking about the million tons per annum that is going to be provided by Qatar here. There's lots going on, so I'm just trying to get the right numbers here for everybody. There we go, right here. Qatar Energy's efforts to address energy security and transition towards renewables. In Qatar, we are increasing production to 126 million tons per annum. We have another 16 to 18 out of the U.S. next year. We're doing it in the most responsible way as emissions are concerned with carbon dioxide, CO2 sequestration, right? So, I mean, there's a business case being made elsewhere around the world for two very important things that we have in Saskatchewan and Alberta. That'd be carbon capture as well. They're talking about using that over in Qatar. They're using it in the United States. That's part of the IRA as well. Yeah, emissions reduction, business case, good jobs. That's what we're looking at here. So I would appreciate the committee's support for this motion. Yeah, there's clearly a moral case around the world. I've laid out some of the human rights issues with Qatar. The fact that, you know, I think would resonate with my friend Mr. Angus over there, that people in Qatar are not allowed to be part of a union. We talked about that. Prohibitions on independent trade unions. That's the exact term from the report right there. So, so as we're talking about, you know, good union jobs, but also just, you know, human rights of workers that are being forced in there from other countries as well too. Canada, we've got a great workforce. We have the highest standards for human rights around the world. We have a fairly robust regulatory environment, but we've heard about the pancaking of regulations as well too. So it'd be nice to be able to unpack some of that, but we have a business case. So let's get the business case, let's get the business rolling, and then we can fix some of the regulatory issues that have come up with, as we've seen with C-69 being ruled largely unconstitutional as well. I think we're going to get a chance, hopefully, to address that in the near future. And I think that will play a part in Canada being able to be a global LNG supplier. There's a proposal now for a new plant actually in northern BC. Tourmaline, I think, is the name of the company there. They're looking to have an LNG export facility off the coast of BC up just south of Alaska. And of course, that would be the opportunity to supply Asia with LNG. And we look at where Japan is located. I mean, one of our allies. We're the closest route to Japan. We also have the strategic advantage of Canada being our winters being a natural advantage to making LNG because of the temperature that we have. That's a strategic advantage that Qatar does not have to make the production of LNG more economic, which again, that gets to the business case that does exist for LNG here in Canada. Yeah, I think I've made my point pretty clear, and I hope that I can count on the support from my colleagues across this committee to support this motion, because it sends a message that Canada has all the things that the world needs when it comes to energy production, but also human rights. Business case exists, so I think we should get this done. And yeah, there is a moral case, there's a business case. Let's do this.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Your motion is on the floor, and we have a speaking list, and the clerk has been keeping close attention. We're going to go to Mr. Dreeshen, then Monsieur Simard, Mr. Falk, Mr. Aldag, and Mr. Angus.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, I think that I was the first to indicate to the clerk that I wanted the floor. So I'm not trying to undo your decision, but clearly I was the first to signal to the clerk when Jeremy, my friend, began his intervention. So for fairness.
Which was that Mr. Dreeshen was signaled first.
Yeah, thank you, Monsieur Simard. The clerk looked up and saw Mr. Dreeshen, and we got you next. So we'll go to Mr. Dreeshen, then go to you.
Yeah, point of order, Mr. Chair. I think I was actually ahead of Mr. Dreeshen. I made eye contact with both of you, and you were looking for somebody at the end of the table who wasn't there.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Mr. Falk, for your intervention, but that was, I did not see you. I saw these two gentlemen had their hands up quite quickly, and the clerk had identified Mr. Dreeshen first. So that's the ruling from what we've determined. We'll go to Mr. Dreeshen.
Make a motion to challenge the chair.
That's your prerogative.
Yep. Challenge the chair, because my hand was up before anybody's hand.
Okay. We have Mr. Aldag on the list as well. Yes. Yeah. You were second? Yeah. Well, we have you a little bit later down the list, but thank you, Mr. Aldag, for being quick with your hand as well. I'll ask the clerk on the process. Mr. Falk has asked to challenge the chair because he believes he had his hand up first. And so I'll ask the clerk on what we do next, if we go to a vote on challenging the chair or not.
So the question before the committee is, shall the chair's decision be sustained? So if you vote for the chair's decision to be sustained, it's to uphold it. If you vote against it, it is to overturn the chair's decision. So that can be accomplished by the same way that any other vote is accomplished in the committee, by obvious consensus, raising of hands, or a recorded division.
It's a recorded division?
If they want to.
So recorded we want a recorded division. Okay. So the question is, my decision that Mr. Dreeshen, and then we go to Monsieur Simard, is upheld, and Mr. Falk has challenged that decision. So
sorry, question. I don't know if that's what we're debating. I think Mr. Falk wanted to go ahead. That's what I would be willing to vote
my
on.
apologies.
So that it's Mr. Dreeshen and then Mr. Falk is what we need to vote on.
Yes. Correct? Correct. Monsieur Simard. As opposed to Monsieur Simard going after Mr. Dreeshen. Yeah.
Point of order.
just to clarify, we'll be voting that to uphold your decision of the speaking order being Mr. Dreeshen, Mr. Simard, Mr. Falk, Mr. Me. Mr. Me. I
Sorry,
am. Me.
Point of order.
Is that the order we're going?
Point of order. My understanding is that Mr. Falk challenged the chair because he wasn't second. So we should keep it simple that Mr. Falk goes second. That's what we're going to vote on.
Correct.
So on the question of whether the chair's ruling is sustained, Mr. Aldag.
No, right?
I'm still unclear what the vote is.
No.
Yes.
Yes? Oh, we're going. So tell us one more time.
Okay,
One more time.
so hold on.
What we're
For
voting
clarity.
is it Mr. Falk's going next?
No.
Or
So the
orders
vote
being-
is
Yes, please.
that Mr. Falk challenged the chair's
All the
decision.
coordination that has to happen
So
in
do you
real time.
support, clerk, do you just want to once again provide clarity, what a yes means and what a no means for members?
So the chair's ruling was the speaking order was Mr. Dreeshen, followed by Mr. Simard, followed by Mr. Falk. And the chair's ruling was challenged. So now the question is, shall the chair's ruling of that speaking order, Mr. Dreeshen, Mr. Simard, and Mr. Falk, be overturned?
Sorry. That's not what we were. I'd asked if we were voting on the fact that Mr. Falk moves ahead. That's the simple way to vote on this.
We have two.
So if we vote on that, I'm willing to vote, not on the overall speaking order.
The question, he challenged your ruling, right? That was your ruling.
I think Mr. Angus's perspective and recommendation would bring a lot of clarity. I think the real issue is I believe I was first on the list. The rest of the order can stay intact.
Yeah, and my ruling is you were not first on the list, Mr.
Right,
Falk.
that's what I'm
Mr. Dreeshen was, and you were not. So Mr. Falk has challenged that he was first on the list, not Mr. Dreeshen. That's what he has challenged. And I have said, just to be clear, I have said that Mr. Falk was not first on the list. Mr. Dreeshen was first on the list. Okay, and Mr. Falk is challenging my decision because he wants to be first. Mr. Dreeshen, what we've identified is first. He is challenging my decision. So do you support me upholding the decision that I have made? So that would be a yes. And it would be a no if you do not support my decision that's being made. I think that's clear. Yes. Okay. If not, I can ask the clerk for a further interpretation of that. Clear? Okay.
Yeah.
So on the question to sustain the chair's ruling, Mr. Aldag.
With that explanation, yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Cormier.
Oui.
Ms. Lapointe.
Oui.
Mr. Sobara.
Oui, yes.
Mr. Dreeshen.
No.
Mr. Falk.
No.
Mr. Patzer.
No.
Ms. Stubbs.
Nay.
Monsieur Simard.
Oui.
Mr. Angus.
Oui.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre for 4.
Before we go to the speaking order, go ahead, Monsieur Smart.
Je vais aussi contester.
I will also challenge your decision because I believe I was the first one who raised my hand. So I will also challenge your decision where I believe it's my turn to speak.
Okay. Monsieur Simard also challenges the decision that he was ahead of Mr. Dreeshen. So we can put that to a vote. Myself and the clerk quickly look up when hands go up, and we do our best of our ability to determine the speaking order.
Clarify then.
Yeah.
So Mr. Simard is challenging because he said he was the next in line, but you didn't see him. But if he was next in line and we vote that he's next in line, then the floor would go to him.
Correct.
Okay, good. That sounds very reasonable to me.
Well, hold on.
Pour être très clair.
To be very clear, I believe that I raised my hand before Mr. Dreeshen. As soon as I saw my colleague speaking, I raised my hand, so I am challenging your decision. I believe it's up to me to speak before Mr. Dreeshen. There you go.
Thank you, Monsieur Simard. The ruling was made with the previous vote that is the established speaking order, but you could ask to be heard now, and if it's the will of the committee that you are heard now, then we will proceed to you being heard now. But the ruling does stand with the previous vote that...
Allons-y de cette façon-là.
Okay, let's go ahead that way.
Just wanting to clarify, would that have to be unanimous, or is it a vote of the majority? I just because I would suggest that it is not the will of the committee for that, but just wanting to just clarify that.
It's a non-debatable motion. I'm going to answer Mr. Patzer's question first. It's a non-debatable motion, and it goes to a vote to the committee, and it's by majority. Okay. We got a point of order by Mr. Dreeshen.
But these are non-debatable motions, right?
Well, yeah, it's non-debatable, but we have a point of order.
We have to go to.
Yeah.
I believe.
We have a point of order. Sorry?
So the point of order that I have is that at any moment, someone can challenge the order by which you or the clerk has determined the speaking arrangements for a motion, and then at that time, you are suggesting that we would be able to continue.
On est dans un débat, là.
This is a debate. You're debating.
Let someone speak. Let him speak.
So if that is the case, it is a point of order. And so therefore, at any time, the will of the majority can take away that person, the person that you would recognize as being the first up in the motion, because that, Chair, affects your ability to manage this.
Yes, but Mr. Dreeshen, committee members do have the right to be heard and can be, from my understanding, can ask for that right as a committee member by taking the floor, as what Monsieur Simard did. He has every right to ask that as a member of this committee, to ask that right. And it's his choice to do so, and your choice and others' choice as well. So back to, did we have, Mr. Angus, did you?
I'm ready. No, I think we need to vote because I think what point of orders are moving into is stalling, and that undermines the principle of non-debatable motion.
We can.
Oh,
so we should be voting.
As long as it's not.
I know Charlie runs the committee, but I think the chair can get the advice from the clerk.
Charlie said because. Okay. Yes, Mr. Falk.
I think this committee has already determined whether or not they wanted to challenge your ruling on the speaking order. The people now raising that issue. The issue wasn't whether I was going first. The issue is whether we were challenging your ruling as to what the speaking order is.
Your point of order is, because we're getting into debate now.
And my point of order is we've already made that decision, and this member from the block agreed with your decision.
So we're
there's
getting
no
into
point to
debate now,
challenge it
but we're
anymore.
getting into debate.
No, it's procedure. This is a point of order. The
Point
motion
of order.
challenging your ruling.
Okay, I give a point of order to the point of order.
I'm on a point of order.
I know, and we have another point of order.
We'll finish the first one, no?
Well, no, I'll ask everybody just to, let's calm down a little bit, one at a time.
Yeah,
We can be disruptive, or we can go through the process. And Mr. Aldag has a point of order on the point of order.
I'm just wondering if we can get a ruling on whether Mr. Simard's challenge is in order. It seems like we're going around on this.
That's not a point of order to the point of order.
It's asking for clarification,
The
right?
point of order
That's what Ted's doing. So
Okay, I'll ask everybody just to hold for a sec.
The point of order, Mr.
I'll ask you to
Chairman,
hold just a sec. I'm just going to talk to the clerk.
sec is very short.
So once again, you're having the member asked to be heard. That's Monsieur Simard. We previously voted to have a speaking, the speaking order, and the committee voted to proceed with that. And then Monsieur Simard has asked to be heard, and I'm not sure what's unclear from a procedural point, but he has the floor to. A motion to be heard, and if he wishes to choose that way, that's where we're at. So your procedure, you had a point of order on procedure. Is there?
Point of order is on procedure. We already had a motion here to challenge the chair. That motion was defeated. The motion wasn't on who's going to. The motion was whether we were going to uphold your ruling as to the speaking order. The majority of the committee decided to uphold your ruling.
Yes.
So there's no need to have a further discussion about who speaks next, because the committee already made that decision.
Mr. Falk.
This request is out of order.
Mr. Falk, it's not. And as the chair of the committee, I've spoken with the clerk. Procedurally, every member has the right to be heard and to bring forward a motion to the floor to be heard. And Mr. Simard is in his right as a committee member to be heard if he so chooses to be heard. He put the motion on the floor. He is in every right in this committee to have that ability, just like everybody else does. And now he had the floor. He asked to be heard. If he wants to proceed in that favor, to challenge the chair to be heard, he has the right to do so. That's my ruling as chair. Based on parliamentary procedure. And we proceed to a vote. It's non-debatable, so we will proceed. Do you have a point of order on procedure?
I do have a point of order.
If we could stick to the procedural point, please, no debate.
Right. To the clerk is a motion that was just presented by Mr. Simard to be heard, debatable or not debatable, because I am prepared to debate that.
It's not debatable.
And
He's asking the clerk.
so from the if I could, the clerk has indicated to you that that is the case.
It's non-debatable. The clerk has indicated to me that it's non-debatable.
So a motion to be heard at any time when anyone is speaking, we can do that. That's all I wanted to know, because I want to know how this committee is going to
procedurally. It is non-debatable. Okay. You've raised a point of order, and I think we've addressed your point of order.
Okay.
We'll now proceed to the question at hand. Monsieur Simard has challenged, would like to be heard. Monsieur Simard would like to be heard as the next speaker. I will leave it up to the committee to vote that way. And so we will proceed to a vote, a recorded vote.
Maybe just given the confusion on the other side earlier, you could just clarify again the question, because there's also lots of talking. So
I think everybody's clear, and I just want to make sure that everybody is clear once and for all. Monsieur Simard has asked to be heard by committee members. So we will be voting to allow Monsieur Simard to be heard. And so if you...
Hopefully your colleagues are picking up what you're putting down, Chair, what you're coordinating with the NDP.
Colleagues, as the chair, let me finish. The vote is Monsieur Simard wants to be heard next. If you vote yes, and the majority of committee decides Monsieur Simard will be next to be heard. So we'll proceed to a roll call vote. Clerk, could we proceed to a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Mr. Alday.
No.
Ms. Jones.
No.
Madame Lapointe.
No.
Mr. Sobara.
No, please.
Mr.
Is it me?
Oui, it's you.
No.
Mr. Dreeshen.
No. Well, sorry. You weren't loud enough.
No. Mr. Falk.
No.
Mr. Patzer.
Nope.
Ms. Stubbs.
Louder.
Oh, no.
Monsieur Simard.
Oui. C'est une victoire
Mr.
morale.
Angus.
Oui.
Your coalition partners didn't pick up the hint, but you guys tried.
2-2. Nays count 8.
Anti-energy, anti... Oh, thanks for telling me.
Okay, colleagues, next on the speaking order, we'll go to Mr. Dreeshen. And once again, colleagues, I will ask everybody to allow our committee members to speak when it's their turn and not speak over each other. It does get difficult for the interpreters when we are speaking over each other. So, Mr. Dreeshen, the floor is yours.
And thank you to the committee members for allowing me this opportunity to speak to this motion. I think one of the key things that I want to mention is just what is happening in Europe and the reasons why the decision by the Canadian government to not put its full force behind our liquid natural gas resources is so critical. And this a summer ago, I was in Birmingham, England with the OSCE, so the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, and we had an opportunity to speak with political people from all over Europe, from Canada, from the United States. And really what that organization does speaks about food security, energy security, and certainly in that case, what was taking place in Ukraine. We know that the political leadership always says what we're doing here, which is, yes, we want to make sure that we're going as green as fast as we possibly can. We want to hit net zero. We're going to do all of those sorts of things. The only problem is that isn't the reality on the ground. And that was something that was made completely obvious. I know that one of the motions that Canada had put forth was basically one on a transition that suggested that we make changes so that oil and gas development in Canada was minimized. And I know that I felt that was going completely in the wrong direction, understanding, and again, some of the people that have spoken here today, they're talking about whether or not we are producing our hydrocarbons in an environmentally friendly way. And of course, it's obvious that we are. And when we look at emissions targets, we know that as far as our oil and gas is concerned, we are 6% or 8%, I believe it is, less emissions per unit of energy now than we were a number of years ago. We know that as far as methane is concerned, that there's been massive improvements there, and that we are world leading in the world. And so I think that's a critical part of it. And I think that's really becomes one of the issues that we need to keep in mind, because if, yes, political leadership, they've already bought in, they have their signatures at the bottom of certain environmental agreements, so they are going to continue, as we do, to suggest that that's the only way to go. But that's not how business sees it. And so here's one of the situations that occurred because Germany couldn't get the supply of oil and gas, or the gas that it had from Russia. It is looking at different ways of getting energy, so it is
Point of order.
up.
Yes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you. I would just like to take this time to apologize to our witnesses. Whenever we've discussed clean energy, whenever we've discussed labor, every time we've had a labor union here, the Conservatives have interfered and interrupted. So I would like to apologize for those who bring their time.
Mr. Angus, a point of order on procedure. We are getting into debate.
Well, it's not a debate, but I sincerely apologize for having to waste your time coming to a gong show like this. So on behalf of New Democrats, we're deeply sorry.
Mr. Angus, well, you're wrapped up, so no more. Okay.
To his point of order, then.
Sorry, Mr. You have a pointer. You have the floor.
To the comment that was just made.
Sorry, you have the floor, so the floor is yours. You can speak while you have the floor.
I want to speak to the point of order, then I'll come back to my.
The point of order is not debatable. If you have a point of order to a procedure,
I will go that way. Okay. I suppose the point is that I'd probably be interrupted, but nevertheless. As far as the comment that Mr. Angus just made, and again, for everyone here, there's lots of times where there are drive-by smears that are presented by Mr. Angus having to do with our energy, with different things that are done. I guess I could stand up, and now knowing the precedent that you simply stand up and make a point of order to say that a member is being unreasonable, I suppose if that's what we need to do every time a comment like that is made by others, then we could do that. I actually didn't think that isn't the way I am. I want to talk about the issues that are here, but to be interrupted, I really care about the members, and I'm so happy that we were able to get the witness testimony here so that we have a chance, we can talk to them, and we have talked to them, and we can get them to give commentary to the clerk, to expand upon some of those things. Yes, it makes it more complicated for us because we don't get a chance to ask questions, but nevertheless, it is important that we have heard their testimony and we have been respectful in all ways when it comes to that. So I'm pleased with that. Just to get back to where I was when discussing with Germans about the reality on the ground, when they were talking about how they were going to have to get back into coal production because they could not get the natural gas coming from Russia, when other countries as well were talking about changes that were necessary because they could not get the natural gas that they were getting before. And we had a chance to be there, and no, we wouldn't be able to get there in the next few years, but at least we could have made that effort, and we could have given some certainty to them that Canada, that has the best oil and gas production record in the world, that we would be there. And that is something that they appreciated. And I've seen this in the last number of years, and of course the discussion here is on, is a carbon tax the best way to do, and we've heard it with some of our witnesses. The U.S. isn't in that, so I mean we're making comparisons, and we're trying to say, does Canada have an opportunity to sell around the world? We've heard testimony how the Americans, how Biden in his first week, has decided that he wanted to push environmental issues. Well, the first environmental thing that he did was cancel Keystone XL. And so by having canceled Keystone XL, instead of us being able to take our heavy oil down into, well, either into Chicago or down into the Gulf Coast so that we could produce the diesel, which comes from the heavy oil, and to make sure that that market was strong. Now we find that they're going to Venezuela. So these are the kinds of things that happen when you have short-sighted environmental goals. And that is the issue that we really have here, is a short-sighted environmental goals. We are losing opportunities. All of these countries have come to us and said, we want your product, but we want to see that you're on side with industry. And all we ever say is, no, that's not really necessary. I'm just dealing with some of the things we've looked at even today in some of this. Clean electricity is going to be our greatest asset. Well, I live in central Alberta. It's freezing up right now. 15 centimeters of snow this morning. There's minus 15, minus 20 in the next couple of days. So freeze up is there. When our local vehicle dealerships say, or we ask them how their electrical vehicle sales are going, they laugh. They say, that is not what we can do here. This is absolutely crazy. I can go through a myriad of issues that they have had. And because we can't produce the natural resources that we require. We've had testimony this morning about critical minerals, how it's 6 times what we need by 2040 than what we're producing already, and 20 times for lithium and that sort of thing. So, but yet we still stand up and say, but we will make sure that we will have our electric vehicles and we will have this grid. Exactly how are we going to get that grid unless we do, as we have done, sadly, for too many years, and that is to bring in these, either the products that are built in countries that don't care about environment, and we buy them. So either that is the situation that we have, or the new ones that are going to be mined in places outside of Canada. Because when, as was mentioned here, it takes 16 years in order to get to the stage where we can get a mine if we're lucky, then how is it that we, no matter what, we have these great goals, how are we ever going to do that? And that becomes part of the energy mix that the world wants. They want us to be able to produce an energy, and we have it, and people so short-sighted to indicate, oh, well, we could just get rid of oil and gas, like that's going to happen in the rest of the world. Well, what are the other products? Let's just go through the whole list of products that come because of hydrocarbons and the relationship that exists. So it is so short-sighted to simply say, oh, but we believe because our government put their signature on the bottom of this declaration that we must continue and follow through. Is no one paying any attention to the relationship that exists? I've said it before, and I will say it again. And we had the discussion when the folks from ATCO were here. I said, how much money has been put aside for the reclamation for your solar panels and your windmills that you have in operation right now? Because within 6 miles of my home, there are 53 windmills that have been there probably 15 to 20 years. Eventually, that is going to have to be reclaimed, or things are going to have to happen to them. They get built by hydrocarbons. That's how they get built. And so for people to say, well, yeah, but we will have windmills, but we want to get rid of hydrocarbons, it is illogical that people say that and that they continue to say that, and they continue to get applause around here because that's the new way of the world happening. The same thing happened. The arguments have looked at for other renewables, and again in Alberta, we have quarter sections of land. So it's a half a mile by a half a mile, and dozens of them at a time where people are saying, well, let's put solar panels on these things. Does anyone understand what is required for that? You need to have a steel grid structure in order to have these things erected, and then you have to have the some way of transferring the power from every one of those solar panels into a main grid, moved into the main collecting area, and that doesn't take energy to make that happen. So these are, and usually what happens is some proponent builds it, and then they sell it to somebody else. And this is where the farmers advocate in Alberta was telling a group of farmers where I was at, saying, you be very careful about anything you sign with these companies, because it is not like oil and gas, where we have a system that if there's an oil well or whatever, or some system in there, that way we can regulate it. We know what is going to happen. But we don't have that assurity when it comes to the renewables, which is the reason, of course, we were slammed by that as well, Albertans, because now you have a moratorium on renewables in Alberta. Isn't that awful? No, it's responsible to take a look at exactly what is taking place in the system. And unless you've got ways of assuring the landowners that it is being done right, then the other argument is all politics. It is all those types of things. And the other aspect of this is sort of the relationship of the energy return on the energy involved to produce something. And I have been saying for a long, long time that we have to measure everything from the first shovel we use to dig it up to the last shovel we use to cover it up. And if you take solar, if you take windmills, if you take oil and gas, if you were brave enough to talk about that for the areas that we flooded so that we have got the hydroelectric power, which no one's brave enough to talk about the effects of dams and so on. If you were to take all of that together and then say, okay, what is best? What is best in this community? What is best in this other community? Then I think you'd start to recognize how significant, our environment is, but also how diverse. When it takes 6 hours to fly from one end of this country to another, so 6 different time zones, and yet the people from within 100 miles of the 49th parallel and below think that they understand how our country works and make decisions on that. It is very frustrating. And then we talk about the relationships with our Indigenous people. Well, I'm sure they would love to have, they might be lower paying jobs, but I'm sure they would love to have these good union jobs. They've got great jobs right now in oil and gas. And they've got massive billions of dollars of investment. And this is where their strengths are. And that's where they lie. But here we have built in an eco-colonialism that is saying we know best. Don't worry, folks. Here in Ottawa and here, those of us that hug the 49th, we know exactly how best that you should manage your lives. And these are the issues that I believe that we have to make sure that we bring out so that people know exactly what is taking place. So when we talk about our liquid natural gas, sorry,
Mr. Dreeshen, we are running at the end of time for a committee.
I'm prepared to start up again next day, if that's fine. Yeah.
So, colleagues, we are at the end of the meeting. First of all, I want to thank the witnesses so much for providing testimony today. You can provide a brief to the clerk if there's something you may have missed or further information to the benefit of this study. So please feel free to provide a brief to the clerk. Colleagues, so thank you so much for attending. Colleagues, on Wednesday, I just want to highlight that we have our first hour panel on this study on clean energy, and the second hour we will be reserving for committee business because our committee has a number of important bills, one that's coming our way, another one that's being voted on today, and so we do have to establish a committee business plan moving forward. So that will be the second hour of our meeting on Wednesday. And I hope everybody is well prepared to have a robust discussion on committee business moving forward. And now, if it's the will of the committee to adjourn, I've got a yes.
Point of order, are you suspending?
Adjourning. I've had adjournment.
Adjournment or suspension?
Adjournment. Adjournment.
You'll have to pick up Mr. Dreeshen at the next one.
We're adjourning. Meeting adjourned.
He has to